The November rain hammered against the windshield of the black Mercedes as it crawled through downtown Chicago traffic. Anthony Castellano sat in the back seat, his jaw tight as he reviewed documents on his tablet. At 42, he'd built an empire that straddled the line between legitimate business and the shadowy world his father had left him. Real estate developments, construction contracts, shipping operations, all clean on paper, all funded by money that had flowed through less reputable channels for decades. His driver, Marcus, navigated toward the financial district where Anthony had a meeting with city contractors. The afternoon had turned bitter cold, and the streets glistened with rain and early darkness. Pedestrians hurried past with umbrellas bent against the wind, their faces hidden beneath hoods and scarves. "Pull over here," Anthony said suddenly, his eyes fixed on something outside the window. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. "Boss, we're going to be late for—" "I said, pull over." Anthony's voice carried the quiet authority that made men twice his size obey without question. The Mercedes eased to the curb near the entrance to Millennium Park. Anthony's attention was locked on a woman sitting on a piece of cardboard beneath a shop awning. Two small children huddled against her, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5 and a girl perhaps 3 years older. The woman held a paper cup toward passing strangers, most of whom walked by without acknowledging her existence. She wore a thin jacket that had once been navy blue but was now faded to gray, torn at the shoulder. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face, but it was her face that had stopped Anthony cold. Even beneath the grime and exhaustion, even after what must have been years of hardship, he recognized her. Sarah Mitchell. His heart began to pound in a way it hadn't since he'd been shot outside a warehouse in his 20s. The scar on his ribs tingled with phantom pain as memories crashed through him. Her laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he was just Anthony, not the Castellano heir, not the dangerous man everyone else saw. "Stay here," he told Marcus, already opening the door. The cold hit him immediately, cutting through his $1,000 suit. He didn't care. He walked toward the woman with measured steps, unsure if she would recognize him, unsure if he wanted her to. As he got closer, he could see the children more clearly. The boy had her dark hair and delicate features. The girl had lighter hair, almost honey-colored, and green eyes that— Anthony's stomach dropped. Those were his eyes, his mother's eyes, his grandmother's eyes. He stopped 3 feet away. Sarah looked up, her expression weary and guarded in the way of people who'd learned that attention from strangers rarely brought anything good. Then her eyes met his, and he watched recognition dawn like a sunrise, beautiful and terrible at once. The paper cup slipped from her fingers, scattering the few coins inside onto the wet pavement. Her face went pale beneath the dirt. "Anthony," she whispered, and the sound of his name in her voice after 9 years hit him like a physical blow. The little girl looked between them, confused. "Mama!" Sarah's hand found her daughter's shoulder, pulling her closer. The boy pressed against her other side, his eyes wide and frightened. Anthony realized he must look threatening, a well-dressed man looming over them, his expression intense and unreadable. "It's okay," Sarah told her children, though her voice shook. It's someone Mama used to know." Anthony crouched down, bringing himself to their level. Up close he could see how thin Sarah had become, how the cold had chapped her hands raw, how her lips were cracked and bleeding at the corners. The children wore clothes that were too small, their faces gaunt with hunger. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his voice rough. Sarah's jaw tightened. "That's none of your concern." "Sarah, we're fine," she said, reaching for the scattered coins. Her hands trembled. From cold or emotion, he couldn't tell. "We don't need anything from you." The little girl was staring at him now with those green eyes, and Anthony felt something crack inside his chest. "What's your name?" he asked her gently. "Emma," she said softly. Then, with the brutal honesty of children, "Are you rich? You look rich." "Emma, hush," Sarah said sharply. Anthony reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Sarah's face flushed with shame and anger. "I said we don't need—" He put $500 bills into the paper cup, then stood. "There's a hotel 2 blocks west, the Riverside. Tell them Anthony Castellano sent you. They'll give you a room, meals, whatever you need." "I can't accept this." Sarah pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. When was the last time she'd eaten? "Anthony, please just go. Pretend you didn't see us." "How old is she?" Anthony asked quietly, his eyes on Emma. Sarah's face went rigid. 8. "Sarah." He said her name like a prayer and an accusation. "How old is she really?" The rain picked up, drumming harder against the awning. The boy started to cry, a thin, miserable sound. Sarah gathered him into her arms, and Anthony could see her fighting tears of her own. 7, she finally whispered. She's 7. Anthony did the math. 9 years since Sarah had disappeared from his life without explanation, without a word. 9 years since his father had told him she'd left Chicago, that she wanted nothing to do with the Castellano family or their world. 8 months of pregnancy before Emma would have been born. Is she mine? The question came out harder than he'd intended. Sarah looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw a flash of the woman he'd loved, fierce and proud and unwilling to bend. It doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. You think you can just walk back into our lives after everything? Sarah's voice rose and several pedestrians glanced their way. You think money fixes what your family did? What my family did? Anthony's mind raced. Sarah, you left. You disappeared. I looked for you for months. You didn't look hard enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, mixing with the rain. Or maybe you were relieved I was gone. Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mama, I'm cold. The fight seemed to drain out of Sarah. She looked at her children, both shivering, both hungry, both depending on her to keep them safe. Anthony watched her pride war with desperation and understood what it cost her when she said, "The Riverside Hotel, 2 blocks west. Room and meals are already paid for. Just give them my name." Sarah nodded stiffly, gathering her few possessions into a torn backpack. Anthony wanted to help, wanted to touch her, wanted to demand answers to the 1,000 questions burning in his mind, but he could see she was barely holding herself together. "Sarah," he said as she prepared to leave, "I need to see you. Tomorrow. We need to talk about this." She looked at him with eyes that held more pain than anger now. "There's nothing to talk about, Anthony. Some decisions can't be unmade. I have a daughter." His voice broke on the word. "You don't get to decide I don't deserve to know her. You think being a father is about biology?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Your family made their choice 9 years ago. I made mine." She took Emma's hand and hoisted the boy onto her hip, then walked away into the rain. Anthony stood frozen, watching them disappear into the crowd. Emma looked back once, those green eyes, his eyes, studying him with a child's curious intensity. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Boss, you okay?" Anthony couldn't answer. His hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. He'd faced down rival families, survived attempts on his life, built an empire from his father's bloody legacy, but nothing had prepared him for this, for seeing the woman he'd loved reduced to begging on the street, for discovering he had a daughter he'd never known existed. "Find out everything," he told Marcus. "I want to know where Sarah Mitchell has been for the past 9 years. I want to know how she ended up on that street corner. I want to know who the boy is and why she was so afraid when she saw me. And if she doesn't want to be found?" Anthony's jaw set in a hard line. "Then find out why my father told me she'd left the city voluntarily. Because I'm starting to think someone lied to me, and if my family had anything to do with putting her on that street." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Marcus nodded and headed back to the car. Anthony stood in the rain a moment longer, his expensive suit soaking through. He thought about Emma's face, about the way she'd looked at him with open curiosity instead of Sarah's guarded fear. He thought about the boy, younger, maybe 4 or 5, and wondered whose child he was. Most of all, he thought about Sarah's words. Your family made their choice 9 years ago. What choice? What had his father done? Anthony pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. His father answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. "Anthony, to what do I owe—" "Sarah Mitchell," Anthony interrupted. "You told me she left Chicago. You told me she wanted nothing to do with us. Was that true?" The silence on the other end lasted too long. "That was a long time ago, son. Let the past—" "Was it true?" Anthony's voice was dangerously quiet. Another pause. "Then, we did what was necessary, for the family, for your future." "So what did you do?" "What I always do," his father said. "I protected what's ours. That girl was a liability, a weakness. You were young, stupid with love. She could have destroyed everything." Anthony closed his eyes, rage and grief warring inside him. "Where did you send her?" "I didn't send her anywhere. I simply made it clear she had 2 choices. Leave Chicago and never contact you again, or face the consequences of being associated with our family. She was smart enough to choose correctly. And if she was pregnant, if she was carrying your grandchild," his father's laugh was cold, "if she'd told you that, you never would have let her go. She was smart about that too. Made it easy for everyone. Anthony ended the call without another word. His hand clenched around the phone until he thought it might shatter. His father had threatened Sarah, had driven her away, and for 9 years he'd believed the lie that she'd chosen to leave. For 9 years his daughter had grown up without him, and Sarah had struggled alone. He thought about the paper cup, the torn jacket, the hunger in those children's faces. He thought about how far Sarah must have fallen to end up begging on a street corner in November. And he thought about how his father had called her a liability and a weakness when she'd been the only person who'd ever made Anthony feel like he was more than his last name and his family's bloody history. The rain turned to sleet, stinging against his face. Anthony didn't move. He stood there until his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. She checked into the Riverside, 2 rooms. She asked them not to tell you the room numbers. Anthony smiled grimly. Sarah could ask for whatever she wanted, but the Riverside was one of his properties. He'd know everything, when she ate, when she slept, when she left. Not to control her, but to protect her. Because if his father had threatened her once, he'd do it again. And this time Anthony would be ready. He headed back to the Mercedes, his mind already working through the implications. His father wouldn't be pleased to learn Sarah had resurfaced. The old man would see it as a threat to the carefully constructed world he'd built. But Anthony wasn't the young, naive man he'd been 9 years ago. He'd learned his father's lessons well, maybe too well. As Marcus pulled into traffic, Anthony made a decision. He would find out the truth about what happened 9 years ago. He would learn everything about Emma and the boy Sarah protected so fiercely. And then he would do whatever it took to make things right, even if it meant going to war with his own family. The rain hammered harder against the windshield, and somewhere across the city, Sarah Mitchell was probably telling her children that the well-dressed man was no one important, that he wouldn't be back, that they were safe now. But she was wrong. Anthony Castellano had just recognized something he thought he'd lost forever, and he had no intention of letting it slip away again, not without a fight. Sarah stood in the middle of the hotel room, unable to move, unable to process that this was real. The Riverside wasn't just any hotel. It was one of the luxury properties downtown, the kind of place she used to walk past and dream about when she'd been a different person living a different life. Emma ran to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. "Mama, look how high up we are. I can see the whole city." 5-year-old Noah was more cautious, clutching Sarah's hand and staring at the enormous bed with wide, uncertain eyes. "Is this ours?" he whispered. "Just for tonight," Sarah said automatically, though the receptionist had said something about the room being available as long as needed. She didn't trust it. Gifts from Anthony Castellano came with strings. They always had. A knock on the door made her jump. Her first instinct was to grab the children and run, but Emma was already at the door, peering through the peephole. "It's a lady with food," she announced excitedly. Sarah opened the door to find a room service cart laden with covered dishes. The attendant smiled warmly. "Compliments of Mr. Castellano. He wanted to ensure you and your children had dinner. Is there anything else you need? Extra blankets? Toiletries?" "No, thank you," Sarah managed. The smell of the food was overwhelming. Real food, hot food. Her stomach clenched painfully. When the attendant left, Emma lifted the silver covers. "Mama, there's chicken, and mashed potatoes, and is that chocolate cake?" Sarah's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She'd spent the last 3 months stretching every dollar, feeding her children whatever she could afford from convenience stores and food banks, watching them grow thinner while she pretended everything was fine. And now Anthony had provided with one phone call what she'd been failing to give them for months. "Can we eat?" Noah asked tentatively, as if he expected the food to vanish if he blinked. "Yes, baby, eat as much as you want." She watched them devour the meal with a mixture of relief and shame. This was what her pride had cost them. Hunger, cold, fear. Maybe she should have swallowed that pride years ago, should have reached out to Anthony somehow. But every time she'd considered it, she'd remembered his father's face, the cold certainty in his voice when he'd laid out her options. "Your presence is a danger to my son and to this family. The authorities are very interested in Anthony's activities. If you care about him at all, you'll disappear before they start asking questions about who he associates with. Unless you'd like to explain to a grand jury exactly what you know about our business operations." She'd been 22, pregnant and terrified. She'd left Chicago the next day. Emma came over with a piece of chocolate cake. "You should eat too, Mama. You always give us your food." Sarah's throat tightened. Her daughter was too observant, had seen too much for a 7-year-old. "I'll eat in a minute, sweetheart. You finish first." After dinner, Sarah ran a bath for the children, a real bath with hot water and soap, not a quick rinse in a gas station bathroom. She scrubbed them clean, careful around Noah's bruised shins from sleeping on concrete, gentle with Emma's perpetually tangled hair. They emerged smelling like hotel soap and looking more like children than refugees. "Mama, can we really sleep in the bed?" Noah asked, eyeing the king-sized mattress with wonder. "Yes, baby. Tonight you can sleep in a real bed." They burrowed under the covers like small animals seeking warmth, and within minutes they were both asleep. Sarah sat beside them, watching their faces relax into the kind of peaceful sleep they hadn't had in months. Emma's hand was curled under her cheek, and Noah was snoring softly, his body finally releasing the tension he carried during waking hours. Sarah allowed herself to cry then, quietly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She'd tried so hard. After leaving Chicago, she'd found work in Indianapolis, built a small life for herself and Emma. She'd kept Anthony's identity from her daughter, told her that her father had died before she was born. It had been easier than explaining the truth, that Anthony came from a world of violence and crime, that his father had threatened her, that loving him had been both the best and worst decision of her life. Then she'd met David, kind, gentle David, who worked construction and didn't ask too many questions about her past. They'd been together 3 years when he died, a job site accident that had been ruled unfortunate but avoidable. The company had fought paying his life insurance, claiming negligence. Sarah had fought back, but lawyers cost money she didn't have. She'd lost their apartment 6 months ago, lost her job at the diner 2 months after that when childcare fell through, and she'd missed too many shifts. The shelters had been full and she couldn't bear the thought of her children in the system, separated from her and each other. So she'd ended up on the street, telling herself it was temporary, that she'd find a way out. And then Anthony had appeared like a ghost from her past, looking at her with those dark eyes that had once promised her the world. She'd seen the shock on his face when he'd recognized her, the anger and confusion and something else, something that looked like the love she'd once believed in. Her phone buzzed. She'd been keeping it alive by charging it at libraries and coffee shops, using it sparingly to search for jobs and housing. Now a text appeared from an unknown number. "It's Anthony. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Restaurant on the ground floor. Please don't run." Sarah stared at the message. She should refuse. She should take the children and disappear again before Anthony dug too deep, before his father found out she was back in Chicago. But Emma deserved better than running. Noah deserved better than cold nights and hunger. And maybe, God help her, she deserved answers too. She deserved to look Anthony in the eye and ask him if he'd known what his father planned, if he'd been relieved when she'd vanished, if he'd ever thought about her during the past 9 years. She texted back, 2 p.m., but the children stay in the room. This conversation isn't for them. His response came immediately. Agreed, thank you. Sarah deleted the messages and turned off the phone. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Tonight she would let her children sleep in warmth and safety, and she would try not to think about how easily Anthony had provided what she'd failed to give them. She would try not to remember how it had felt to be loved by him, before his world had consumed everything good between them. The city lights glowed through the window, and somewhere out there, Anthony was probably planning what to say, how to fix this mess. But Sarah knew better. Some things couldn't be fixed with money or power or good intentions. Some choices once made carved permanent scars into your life. She curled up beside her children and closed her eyes, breathing in their clean scent, feeling their warmth against her. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least they had tonight. Anthony arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early. He'd spent the night lying awake, his mind cycling through possibilities and questions. Marcus had provided a preliminary report just after midnight. Sarah Mitchell had indeed left Chicago 9 years ago, moved to Indianapolis, worked as a waitress, married a man named David Chen, and returned to Chicago 6 months ago, following Chen's death. But the details were sparse, the gaps significant. Where had she been living? How had she ended up on the street? And most importantly, why had she come back to the one city where his family's shadow loomed largest? At 1:55 p.m., Sarah appeared in the restaurant doorway. She'd showered and changed into clothes that must have been provided by the hotel, simple jeans and a sweater that were clean, but hung loose on her thin frame. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She looked fragile and fierce at once, like a wounded animal prepared to fight. Anthony stood as she approached. "Thank you for coming. I'm here for answers, not gratitude." She sat down without waiting for him to pull out her chair. "Let's get this over with." A waiter appeared and Anthony ordered coffee for both of them. Sarah's hands wrapped around the cup when it arrived, as if she were still cold despite the restaurant's warmth. "I didn't know," Anthony said, without preamble. "About Emma? About any of it? My father told me you'd left voluntarily, that you wanted nothing to do with me." Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Of course he did. That's easier than admitting he threatened me. Tell me what happened." She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he deserved the truth. Finally, she began to speak, her voice flat and exhausted. "I found out I was pregnant about 2 weeks before I left. I was planning to tell you that weekend. Then your father showed up at my apartment." Sarah's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "He said the feds were building a case against you, that anyone close to you was in danger of being subpoenaed. He said if I really loved you, I'd disappear before I became a liability." Anthony's jaw clenched. "That's not—" "He also said that if I stayed, if I tried to tie myself to your family through a child, he'd make sure I was implicated in whatever charges they brought. He showed me documents, financial records, photographs of you with known criminals. He said prosecutors would love to have a girlfriend who could be coerced into testifying." Jesus Christ. Anthony's hands curled into fists on the table. "Sarah, there was never any federal case. My father was cleaning house, cutting loose anyone he saw as a potential weakness. He was lying to you." "I know that now," Sarah said quietly, "but I was 22 and pregnant and terrified. He gave me $5,000 in cash and told me to start over somewhere else. He said if I ever contacted you, he'd make sure I regretted it. So I left." The waiter returned, and they both waved him away. Anthony needed to hear this, needed to understand the full scope of his father's betrayal. "I went to Indianapolis, found a cheap apartment, got a job waiting tables. Emma was born 7 months later." Sarah's expression softened briefly. "I thought about calling you every single day for the first year, but your father had made it clear that I'd be putting you in danger if I did. And by then, I'd built a life, a small one, but it was mine." "What about David?" Anthony had to force the name out. "I met him when Emma was 2. He was kind, stable, everything your world wasn't. He knew I'd had a daughter young, but I told him the father was out of the picture. We got married when Emma was 4. Noah was born a year later." Anthony absorbed this information like physical blows. She'd built a family, a life, and he'd missed all of it. "You loved him?" Sarah met his eyes. "Not the way I loved you. But yes, I loved him. He was a good man, Anthony. He treated Emma like his own daughter. And when Noah was born—" Her voice cracked. "He was so happy to be a father. What happened to him?" "Construction accident 2 years ago. A crane operator made a mistake, and David was in the wrong place when equipment fell. He died instantly." Sarah's composure was breaking now, tears sliding down her cheeks. "The company fought the insurance claim, said it was David's fault for not following safety protocols. I spent every penny I had fighting them in court and lost. Without his income, I couldn't keep up with rent. I tried, Anthony. I worked 2 jobs, but childcare costs more than minimum wage pays, and I kept losing positions because Emma was too young to watch Noah alone and—" "Stop." Anthony reached across the table and took her hand. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "You don't have to explain, I understand. Do you?" Her voice rose. "Do you understand what it's like to watch your children go hungry? To sleep in a car in January because the shelters are full? To beg on the street because you're out of options and pride doesn't keep your kids warm?" "No," Anthony admitted. "I don't. But I understand my father destroyed your life to protect his interests. I understand he lied to both of us, and I understand that Emma is my daughter, and I've missed 7 years of her life because of decisions other people made." Sarah pulled her hand back, wiping her eyes with her napkin. "What do you want from me, Anthony?" "I want to help. I want to be a father to Emma if she'll let me. I want to make sure you and the kids have everything you need. I don't want your money." "This isn't about money." Anthony leaned forward, his voice intense. "This is about taking responsibility. This is about my father robbing us of 9 years, and me not letting him steal 1 more day. Emma deserves to know her father. You deserve to be safe and stable. And Noah," he paused, "Noah deserves better than what you've been able to give him on your own." Sarah flinched at that, but she didn't argue. They both knew he was right. "What do you propose?" she asked finally. "Move into a place I own. Not a handout. Consider it back child support. Let me get to know Emma. Let me help with Noah, too, and—" He hesitated. "Let me figure out what the hell we're going to do about my father. Your father. Sarah's face went pale. Anthony, if he finds out I'm back, he already knows. Anthony's phone had been ringing all morning with calls from his father's number. He'd ignored everyone. And he knows I know what he did. We're going to have that conversation soon, but I need you safe first. He's dangerous. You know he's dangerous. So am I. Anthony's voice was cold, carrying the weight of his reputation. And I'm done letting him control my life. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 2 decades building an empire under his shadow. He doesn't get to tell me who I can love or who I claim as my child. Sarah looked at him with something like fear and hope mixed together. You could lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered once. I won't make that mistake again. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 9 years pressing down on them. Finally, Sarah said, "There's an apartment building in Lincoln Park. 3 bedrooms, safe neighborhood. You own it?" Anthony pulled out his phone and made a call. 30 seconds later, he looked up. "As of today, you have a 3-bedroom unit on the 5th floor. Furnished, utilities included. The building has a doorman and security cameras. No one gets in unless you approve them." Just like that. Just like that. Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "I need to think about what to tell Emma about you, about her father not being dead like I told her. Tell her the truth. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for." The truth. Sarah's laugh was hollow. "The truth is that I loved you so much I let your father scare me away. The truth is that I've been lying to her for 7 years. How do I explain that? You tell her you were protecting her. You tell her you did what you thought was right." Anthony reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. "And you tell her that her father wants to know her, if she's willing to give him a chance." Sarah's fingers intertwined with his, and for a moment they were just 2 people who'd loved each other once, and lost everything because of it. "I'm scared, Anthony. So am I. But we'll figure it out together. Your father is my problem, not yours. You focus on Emma and Noah. I'll handle my family." They talked for another hour, working through the logistics of moving into the apartment, arranging for Emma to meet Anthony properly, discussing schools and doctors, and all the mundane details that came with rebuilding a life. It felt surreal and overwhelming, and right in a way Sarah hadn't felt in years. When they finally stood to leave, Anthony pulled her into a brief embrace. She stiffened at first, then relaxed against him, breathing in his familiar scent beneath the expensive cologne. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for doing what I should have done 9 years ago if my father hadn't interfered." Sarah pulled back and looked up at him. "You didn't know we can't change the past." "No, but we can make damn sure the future is different." As Sarah headed back to the room where Emma and Noah were watching television and eating room service, Anthony made a call to Marcus. "Set up a meeting with my father. Tonight. Private location. Just the 2 of us." "Boss, are you sure that's wise?" "Wisdom stopped being a priority the moment I found out he threatened the mother of my child. Tonight, Marcus. Make it happen." Anthony hung up and stared out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in this city, his father was probably already planning his next move, already thinking about how to neutralize the threat Sarah represented. But Anthony had spent 9 years learning to be just as ruthless as the old man, just as strategic. And this time he wouldn't let anyone take what was his, not his father, not his family's enemies, not anyone. The game had changed. Sarah and Emma weren't pawns to be sacrificed. They were the only things that mattered, and Anthony would burn down everything he'd built before he let them be threatened again. The warehouse sat in an industrial district on the south side, one of several properties the Castellano family owned through shell corporations. Anthony arrived at 10 p.m. with Marcus stationed outside as insurance. His father's car was already there. The old black Cadillac that Salvatore Castellano had been driving for 20 years, refusing to upgrade no matter how much money the family accumulated. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty except for a few stacked crates and a desk, with 2 chairs positioned beneath a bare bulb. Salvatore stood near the desk, a short, stocky man in his 70s, whose age hadn't diminished his presence. He'd been running the family since he was 30, built an empire through equal parts cunning and cruelty, and never apologized for a single decision. "You called this meeting," Salvatore said without preamble. "So talk." "Sarah Mitchell is back in Chicago." Anthony kept his voice level, controlled. "With my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter who I knew nothing about because you threatened her mother and drove her away." Salvatore lit a cigar, taking his time with it. "I did what was necessary. You were young, reckless, letting your feelings cloud your judgment. That girl was a liability. Don't call her that. And I protected you, protected the family. If the feds had gotten to her, convinced her to testify, there was no federal investigation. Anthony stepped closer. You lied to her. You terrorized a pregnant 22-year-old woman because you couldn't control me any other way. Salvatore's eyes hardened. Watch your tone, boy. I'm still your father. And I'm not a boy anymore. I'm 42 years old. I've built this family into something more powerful than anything you created, and I'm done taking orders. Anthony's voice was dangerously quiet. You cost me 9 years with my daughter. You cost Sarah everything, and you did it to maintain control. Control keeps us alive, Salvatore snapped. You want to know what happens when we lose control? Ask your Uncle Dominic. Oh, wait, you can't, because he's serving life in federal prison because he got sloppy, because he let someone get close who shouldn't have. Sarah wasn't a threat. Everyone's a threat until proven otherwise. Salvatore pointed his cigar at Anthony. You think this life allows for happy endings for normal families? Wake up. The moment that girl got pregnant with your child, she became a target. For the feds, for our enemies, for anyone who wanted leverage against you. So you made the decision for both of us. I made the decision that kept you alive and out of prison. You want to thank me? Fine. You want to hate me? Also fine. But don't pretend I did this out of malice. I did this out of love for my son. Anthony laughed bitterly. Love? You threatened the woman I loved and drove away my child. That's not love, that's possession. Call it what you want. The result is you're standing here, free and powerful, instead of dead or locked up. Salvatore's expression softened slightly. Anthony, I know you're angry, but bringing this woman back into your life is a mistake. She knows too much about our business. She knows nothing about our business. She was a college student I was dating. We never discussed family operations. And she's a complication we don't need. The girl, the other kid, the emotional mess of it all. You have responsibilities to this family that go beyond your personal feelings. That's where you're wrong. Anthony's voice was steel. My daughter is my responsibility now. Sarah and her son are under my protection, and if anyone, including you, threatens them again, there will be consequences. Salvatore set down his cigar carefully. Are you threatening me? I'm setting boundaries. The family business continues as always, but Sarah, Emma, and Noah are off limits. They're not bargaining chips, not leverage, not collateral damage. And if I disagree? Anthony met his father's eyes. Then you'll force me to choose between my family of blood and my family of choice. And I promise you won't like my decision. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Salvatore had taught Anthony everything he knew about power and strategy, but he'd forgotten to teach him mercy, and that oversight had created a son who was just as ruthless as his father, but with different priorities. She'll destroy you, Salvatore said finally. Love always does in our world. Maybe. But that's my choice to make, not yours. Salvatore picked up his cigar and took a long drag. The old guard won't like this. They'll see it as weakness, bringing in outsiders. Then they can answer to me about it. I run operations now, not you. You retired, remember? I never retired, I delegated. But Salvatore's smile was thin. Fine. You want to play house with your little family. Do it. But when it all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me about how I was right. If it falls apart, I'll deal with it, on my own terms. Anthony turned to leave, but his father's voice stopped him. That girl, Emma, she really mine? Your granddaughter? Yes. Salvatore was quiet for a moment. I have a granddaughter. You gave up the right to know her when you threatened her mother. Anthony? No. Anthony looked back at his father. You don't get to have it both ways. You can't threaten someone I love and then expect family privileges. Emma will never know you hurt her mother, but she also won't know you as her grandfather unless Sarah agrees. And after what you did, I doubt she ever will. He left before Salvatore could respond. Outside, Marcus was waiting by the car, alert and armed. Everything okay, boss? For now, but keep security tight on Sarah's building. If my father decides to make a move, he won't get past me. Anthony nodded and climbed into the car. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma wants to meet you tomorrow. Park near the apartment. She likes swings. Anthony smiled, despite the tension still coiled in his chest. Tomorrow. What time? 10 a.m. And Anthony, thank you for everything. He didn't respond, just stared at the message and tried to imagine what it would be like to meet his daughter properly, to be introduced not as a stranger, but as her father. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Marcus started driving. and Anthony watched the city pass by his window. Somewhere in this sprawling urban landscape, Emma was probably sleeping in a warm bed, her belly full, her mother nearby. That was worth whatever price he'd have to pay for defying his father. Tomorrow he would meet his daughter. Tonight he would prepare for the fallout. The playground was busy for a Thursday morning. Mothers with strollers, nannies with energetic toddlers, retired grandparents pushing kids on swings. Anthony stood at the edge of the park, watching Sarah and Emma approach from across the grass. He'd been there for 15 minutes, early and nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first meeting with Colombian distributors at 25. Emma walked between Sarah and Noah, holding both their hands. She'd been dressed carefully. New jeans, a purple sweater, her hair in 2 neat braids. Anthony recognized Sarah's work in those details, the way a mother prepared her child for something important. When they were close enough, Sarah knelt beside Emma and spoke quietly. Emma nodded, then looked at Anthony with those green eyes that were so unnervingly like his own. She walked forward slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi, Emma." Anthony crouched down to her level. "Your mum told you who I am?" Emma nodded. "She said you're my real dad, that you didn't know about me because of some grown-up problems. That's right, I wish I'd known about you from the beginning. I would have been there." Emma studied him with a child's brutal honesty. "You're really tall, and you have fancy clothes. Are you rich?" Despite everything, Anthony smiled. "I guess I am. Does that matter? Mama says being rich doesn't make you a good person, but being poor doesn't make you bad either. Your mama is very smart." Emma seemed to consider this. "If you're my real dad, does that mean my other dad wasn't real?" Anthony's chest tightened. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching with tears in her eyes, Noah pressed against her side. "Your other dad loved you very much. He was real in all the ways that matter. I'm the person who helped make you, but he was the one who raised you, and that's important. He died." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact in the way children dealt with tragedy. "A big thing fell on him at work. Mama cried a lot. I'm sorry that happened. It must have been really scary." Emma nodded. "We had to move away from our apartment. Then we didn't have anywhere to live. Mama tried to hide it, but I knew we were in trouble." She looked at Sarah, then back at Anthony. "Are you going to help us, or are you going to go away like other people who said they'd help?" The question hit harder than any accusation. "I'm going to help, and I'm not going away, Emma. I promise. Promises can break." "Yes, they can, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep this one." Emma seemed to accept this with a child's pragmatic wisdom. "Do you know how to push swings?" "I think I can figure it out." She took his hand, small and warm and trusting in a way that made Anthony's throat close, and led him to the swing set. Sarah followed with Noah, settling on a bench nearby where she could watch. Emma climbed onto a swing, and Anthony positioned himself behind her. "Not too high," she instructed. "Mama always pushes too high and it scares me." "Got it. Not too high." He pushed gently, finding a rhythm. Emma's laughter started small and grew, her braids flying behind her as she swung back and forth. Anthony found himself smiling, something loosening in his chest that had been tight for 9 years. "Higher." Emma changed her mind, her fear forgotten in the moment. "I want to touch the sky." Anthony pushed higher, watching his daughter soar, and thought about all the moments he'd missed. First words, first steps, first day of school. He couldn't get those back, but he could be there for all the moments to come. After 15 minutes, Emma jumped off the swing with the fearless abandon of a 7-year-old and ran to Noah. "Come on, Noah, you try." Noah looked at Sarah uncertainly. She nodded. "Go ahead, baby. It's okay." The boy approached Anthony shyly. He was small for 5, with his mother's dark hair and his late father's Asian features. Anthony lifted him onto the swing. "Ready?" Noah nodded, and Anthony pushed carefully, aware that this wasn't his child, but still someone under his protection now. Emma ran around the playground with other kids, her earlier caution forgotten. Anthony watched her and thought about how resilient children were, how quickly they could adapt to new circumstances. Sarah came to stand beside him. "She likes you." "She's amazing, they both are." Noah's been having nightmares about the street, about being cold and hungry. Last night was the first night he slept through. Sarah's voice cracked. "Thank you doesn't cover it, Anthony. You don't have to thank me. This is my responsibility." "No, it's not. Noah isn't your son. You could have just helped with Emma, and he's part of your family. That makes him part of mine." Anthony slowed the swing as Noah started to look dizzy. "Besides, he's a good kid. Patient with Emma, protective of you. Those are qualities I respect. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children play. Then Sarah said, "Your father, he's really going to leave us alone? He doesn't have a choice. Anthony, I know how your family works. He's not going to just accept this. He'll accept it because I've made it clear what happens if he doesn't." Anthony looked at her. "I'm not the same person I was 9 years ago, Sarah. I've learned how to be just as ruthless as him when I need to be. The difference is I choose who deserves that ruthlessness and who doesn't." Sarah shivered despite the morning sun. "That scares me. Not for me, but for you. I don't want you to become your father. I won't, because I have you and Emma to remind me who I want to be." He caught himself. "I mean, I know we're not together, but having you back in my life, knowing Emma exists, it changes things. It gives me something to build toward that isn't just power and money." "Anthony." Sarah's expression was conflicted. "We can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. We're different people now." "I know. I'm not asking to pick up where we left off. I'm asking for a chance to figure out what we can be now. As co-parents at least. As friends, maybe. As—" He didn't finish the sentence. "As what?" "As whatever we need to be for Emma's sake, and maybe, eventually, for our own." Before Sarah could respond, Emma ran over, breathless and grinning. "Can we get ice cream, please?" Anthony looked at Sarah, who nodded permission. "Ice cream it is. There's a place 2 blocks away that makes the best chocolate chip." They walked through the neighborhood together, Anthony, Sarah, Emma, and Noah, and to anyone watching, they might have looked like a normal family enjoying a normal day. No one would have guessed the complicated history, the threats and secrets, the 9 years of separation. At the ice cream shop, Emma ordered chocolate chip in a cone, and Noah got vanilla in a cup. Anthony paid, waving away Sarah's attempt to contribute. They sat at an outdoor table, the kids focused on their treats, the adults navigating the strange new territory of their rebuilt connection. "I want to set up college funds for both of them," Anthony said quietly. "And I need to figure out schools. The apartment building has good public schools nearby, but there are also private options if you prefer—" "Anthony, stop." Sarah put her hand on his. "You're trying to solve everything at once. Can we just take it one day at a time?" He looked at their hands, hers still showing the rough effects of months on the street, his manicured and soft, despite the violence they'd committed over the years. "I don't know how to do this slowly. I've missed 7 years. Every day feels like more time lost." "I know, but Emma needs time to adjust. Noah needs stability, not constant change. And I need—" She paused. "I need to figure out who I am now. I've spent so long just surviving that I forgot how to live. Then I'll help you figure it out. All 3 of you." Emma looked up from her ice cream, chocolate smeared across her face. "Are you going to be around a lot now? Like, every day?" Anthony glanced at Sarah, who nodded slightly. "Would you like that?" Emma considered seriously. "I think so. As long as you don't try to replace my other dad. He was my dad first. I would never try to replace him. He'll always be important. I'm just an addition." "Like bonus dad?" Anthony couldn't help but smile. "Yeah, like bonus dad. Okay then." Emma returned to her ice cream, the matter settled with a child's simple logic. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, walking through the park, stopping at a bookstore where Anthony bought Emma 3 books she picked out, and Noah a picture book about trucks. Sarah tried to protest, but he cut her off with a look that said this wasn't up for discussion. By the time they returned to the apartment building, Noah was falling asleep on Sarah's shoulder, and Emma was chattering about the books she was going to read before bed. Anthony walked them up to their floor, carrying the bag of books. At the door, Emma hugged his legs. "Bye, bonus dad." The words hit him like a physical blow, sweet and painful and perfect. "Bye, Emma. I'll see you soon, okay? Tomorrow?" He looked at Sarah, who nodded tiredly. "Tomorrow." After the door closed, Anthony stood in the hallway for a moment, processing the day. He'd met his daughter properly. She'd accepted him, called him bonus dad, let him into her life with the openness that only children possessed. It wasn't the 9 years he'd lost, but it was a start. His phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. "Boss, we have a situation. One of your father's associates was asking questions about the Lincoln Park building. Nothing overt, but handle it. Make it clear that anyone who comes near that building without my explicit permission answers to me directly. Copy that." Anthony hung up and headed for the elevator. The euphoria of the day was fading, replaced by the reality of the world he lived in. His father might have agreed to back off, But the old man had decades of habits and instincts that didn't change overnight. There would be challenges ahead, threats both obvious and subtle. But as Anthony stepped out into the cooling evening air, he realized something had shifted inside him. For years he'd been building power for its own sake, collecting money and influence like insurance against an uncertain world. Now he had something real to protect, something that mattered more than any business deal or territory dispute. He had a daughter who called him Bonus Dad. He had a woman he'd never stopped loving, even when he'd tried to convince himself he had. He had a purpose beyond survival and success. And he would defend it with everything he had, even if it meant going to war with his own blood.